I'm Dr. West again. Remember, we're talking about the book Prevent, Survive, Thrive. And particularly, we're talking about one chapter called Why Me Think DDT. It's interesting that one of the most common questions I get from my patients is, why did I get breast cancer? There's none in my family. I don't get it. I did everything right. I exercise, I eat well, and yet I end up with breast cancer in my 40s. It doesn't make sense. Well, I would always kind of dodge that question, saying, well, we just don't know. I mean, there are some that are genetically related, but those are unusual. But a study came out just a few years ago that looked at daughters of mothers who were exposed to high levels of DDT, which is an environmental toxin that was used decades ago to control mosquitoes and other insects. As it turns out, the daughters of those mothers were at increased risk for developing breast cancer. The study is fascinating. If you want more information, read the book. But here's what happened just a few weeks ago. I was discussing this issue with Carol, and she said, oh my gosh, my mom was in Europe. She was exposed to high levels of DDT. And Carol had the same question. Why did she get breast cancer? So I thought it would be worthwhile to have Carol tell us your story. So tell us, what about your mom, Carol?
Well, Dr. West, my mom came from a large family. They had 11 kids, and they were in Holland, in the province of South Holland. And during the war, World War II, there was a lot of hunger and famine in the country, and a lot of problems with critters, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there was head lice in the schools, there were bed bugs, there was a lot of that going on. So they would spray DDT regularly in city buses. They would simply walk through a city bus and spray DDT. They would put it in the kids' hair, and I don't know if it came in a powder form, but they would put it in the kids' hair to kill head lice in the schools. And they would also, and that's a story my mom has related to me, they would also put it in their bed sheets because they did not want bed bugs. And the Dutch were very worried about cleanliness and those standards being maintained. So while the war went on and following it, they continued to use it.
Right.
And
well, the USA, I don't think it was quite that extensive, but I remember when I was growing up, just a kid after World War II, that everybody had a DDT sprayer, and we just thought it was the right thing to do, and so we were always exposed to it. But the study that's come out was quite amazing. Rachael Carlson, in her book Silent Spring, was aware of birds dying because of the spraying of DDT, and her book was entitled Silent Spring because of that. And she went on to study the issue. She was a scientist and found some very concerning things. Well, she ended up dying of metastatic breast cancer. But a group of her acolytes decided to test out her theory. So this is 50, 60 years ago. They started getting samples of women who were exposed to DDT, or actually they took samples of all women who went into one of the Berkeley OB departments and delivered their babies and signed up and gave their blood samples. Then they followed these women for decades, and they followed their daughters for decades. And they, as a doctor, they compared serum samples in the mom with the probability of the daughter getting breast cancer, and they found a very close correlation that the moms who were exposed to the highest levels of DDT, their daughters had increased risk of breast cancer. Well, think about it. 3 out of 4 breast cancers, we have no idea what causes them. But I think there is a concern about toxins, and there are toxins everywhere, and I think the public is aware of it, and we really don't know what to do. Certainly we want to be careful on our obvious exposure, but even subtle things. We know BPA is much like DDT, and it's in cans, and it's all throughout the environment. It's so ubiquitous that almost it seems impossible, but there's one group of women that really has to take this seriously, and that's women who are considering a pregnancy. It turns out that very early in fetal development, the first trimester, and probably the first part of the first trimester, sometimes when the woman isn't even aware she's pregnant yet, that they're ultra sensitive to these toxins. So it may well be that when your mom was pregnant, that she was exposed to this DDT or had DDT in her system, and this is what led to changes when you were in a little embryo developing that puts you at increased risk of breast cancer. And if this is the case, it's mind-boggling. Because with toxins everywhere, what are people to do? And sometimes a woman's pregnant before she knows she has to be careful about toxins. So this is a very exciting subject. I really appreciate your telling that story, because most, the younger people I talk to now don't even know what DDT is. They're not aware of how common it was.
It's so true. Yes. Yes. Well, and I was going to add, so my mom immigrated here to the United States in the 50s and met my father here. And so I was born locally. I was raised locally. And I think that that the history of where I was raised also may have played a role. I don't know for sure, but there was a lot of industrialization in that town where I was raised, and so it raises red flags everywhere for me.
I was kind of a non-believer, and because everybody, you say that this may be, but there was not even any evidence to suggest a relationship between toxin exposure and breast cancer. But this is really an eye-opener to me. There's nothing you can do to change the history, but it turns out DDT is very slowly metabolized, and so you will have some in your system, and it may be there, and there's a theory you'll pass it on. It's kind of a frightening concept. Most of these other toxins are metabolized quicker. So, for instance, BPA, which is very similar, it's an estrogen modulator. It influences estrogen in the body, and thus changes breast cancer risk. At least that one, you can stay away from tin cans and various things that are in the environment, and particularly for women planning a pregnancy, they can plan ahead and avoid exposure. But this is a whole new subject to me, and I was just mind-boggled by it, and I hope that the chapter explains it well, and I think we're going to have some follow-up discussion on this. There's a couple of websites out there that really get into this issue, but I think any particular young woman anticipating a pregnancy should take the time to become aware of this toxin issue.
Yes. Oh, I'm so glad to learn more about the DDT thing, Dr. West. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Carol.
That's a good explanation.
Thank you for sharing this story. I hope you enjoyed it. This is a first-hand discussion with somebody whose mother was exposed to DDT, and it brings up a very interesting issue for the future about what to do about toxin, with particular emphasis on women planning a pregnancy and being particularly careful. Thanks.